Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is a big day for IETA, for the World Bank, and for the government of Singapore, and our several partners that you're going to learn about in launching the Climate Action Data Trust. And I want to tell you where this has come from. Probably 4 years ago, we started a process with the World Bank, we at IETA, because they were convening a set of governments, including the government of Singapore, who were interested in using carbon markets under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Not because it's fun, but because they wanted to achieve the objective of holding global warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. Those governments were committed and wanted to make sure that they could achieve their aspirations, and had realized that it's better to do it together rather than apart. And they also recognized an important role that we in the private sector could play in helping to achieve that ambition. So we started a set of dialogues about what to do, because the Article 6 negotiations seem to be taking forever. No offense, Ben. But the Article 6 negotiations sort of like slogging along, and many in the private sector were ready to get started early, and were interested in starting to think about how to build out what we think of as the commercial elements. How do we breathe commercial life? How do we get a conference in Singapore that 600 people want to come to rather than 100, right? We wanted to build this up. And we worked through a whole lot of different problems that market visionaries were looking down the path and seeing coming. But the one that emerged as a sort of a unique one, and one that really needed special attention, was the infrastructure play. How do we get the state-of-the-art infrastructure to be on our side in this, and to sort of accelerate the ability to bring markets together and accelerate their use? And that led us on a really productive set of conversations about the digital, end-to-end digital vision that some, again, market pioneers were beginning to think about. A real core element of this, though, is the data infrastructure. And I just want, as we talk about this today, it is a really exciting day because we're able to launch this and really get started with populating it with data, and giving you in the market possibility of new tools that you can use. But I just wanted to sort of start from the outset and saying this isn't about, a cool new digital market. This is about markets in service of the Paris Agreement and achieving the net zero ambitions. So that's why we are a part of this, and I think it's what brought all of us in the collaboration together. I'm going to pause for a moment. We're fortunate that we have a video message from the Second Minister for Trade and Industry in Singapore, Tan Lee Long. And I want to bring that up to sort of help set the tone for this. And then we have a few other remarks before we introduce some of the members of the new Governing Council of the CAD Trust. So can we bring up the video?
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm delighted to be part of the launch of Climate Action Data Trust, CAD Trust. Carbon markets play a significant role in accelerating efforts to advance climate action to meet the Paris Agreement goals. To unlock the full potential of carbon markets for greater climate action, there is urgency to put in place guidelines and mechanisms to address concerns on quality, standards, and transparency of carbon credits. An inordinate amount of work has been undertaken by international organizations to address concerns related to the quality of carbon credits and standardization of carbon markets. CAD Trust plays an important role in addressing lingering transparency concerns in carbon markets. As a global carbon market infrastructure that links and harmonizes data from various carbon credit registries, the CAD Trust promotes transparency and trust in carbon markets by reducing the risk of double counting and enabling information sharing. Transparency injects greater trust in carbon credit transactions and is a key ingredient in the scaling up of carbon markets. This would in turn instill confidence in the acceptance of high-quality carbon credits for use towards meeting emissions targets by countries and companies. Southeast Asia holds some of the most valuable carbon stock in the world. Therefore, we are delighted to anchor the CAT Trust in Singapore, as it has the potential to catalyze development of carbon markets in Southeast Asia. And it also strengthens our efforts to build Singapore as a carbon services and trading hub. Many like-minded countries and partners have already come on board the CAT Trust. We welcome more countries and partners to join this endeavor to create greater transparency in carbon markets. Ultimately, the development of robust carbon markets will go a long way in channeling funds to emission reduction and removal projects to accelerate decarbonization efforts and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Once again, congratulations on the launch of the CAT Trust today.
Next, I'd like to ask Takuya Kamata to come up. He is the country director for the World Bank here in Singapore and a friend and supporter, guide on this project. So please come up and offer your opening remarks, Takuya.
Well, in case you are wondering while Doc was talking why this name is here, I'm the culprit, so I'm Tak Kamata. Thank you very much. But the joke aside, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the session of the Climate Action Data Trust. So let me start my speech with the expression of gratitude. I am so grateful for the presence of many of our partners here today. And you represent what is the best in the global professional climate community, meaning governments, multilateral organizations, industries, technology companies, entrepreneurs, investors, financiers, civil society, and academia, and many others. But first and foremost, I want to thank the International Emissions Trading Association and also National Climate Change Secretariat in the Prime Minister's Office of the Government of Singapore for organizing and hosting the Asia Climate Summit and for being amazing partners to the climate actions, including Climate Warehouse. And recognition and gratitude also go to Chia Network, our dedicated partner who spent the last 3 years, many more years, developing this system, as well as google.org for helping us in the implementation phase of the trust. So now I'm very happy to announce jointly with IETA, Government of Singapore, and the World Bank for the launch of Climate Action Data Trust today. So what is a Climate Action Data Trust? Of course, you will see the discussion and the presentation, but it's basically a public open source metadata system secured on the blockchain technology to share information about carbon credits and projects across decentralized information platforms. So it aims to enhance transparency and environmental integrity of carbon credit transactions and international carbon markets. So eventually, it will help catalyze climate actions towards the Paris Agreement objectives. So let me highlight how important partnership has been for the development of this trust. The trust is a result of 3 years of efforts of very rigorous designing, prototyping, and designing, and testing with over 30 organizations and countries. So it involved government of Chile, Japan, Peru, Rwanda, Senegal, Singapore, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, UK, and Uganda. And other independent standards and partners were VERA, American Carbon Registry, Climate Action Reserve, Global Carbon Council, Gold Standard, Eco Registry Colombia, HIS Market, SK Certification Center, Gen Zero, EBRD, UNDP, UNFCCC, Climate Ledger Initiative, Climate Check, IETA, of course, and then Open Earth Foundation. So it was a very rich partnership which made this happen. And in addition, shareholder consultation was made with more than 70 private and public institutions to develop the governance mechanism for this trust. So now, of course, I have to do the promotion of World Bank Group. So World Bank is also stepping up its contribution too. So we have recently launched the Big Trust Fund, Fund for Scaling Climate Action by Lowering Emission, we call it SCALE, with the aim of raising $1 billion US. And also on the technical capacity building side, we provide a service for institutional development through the Partnership for Market Implementation. And of course, you have heard Climate Warehouse for many years now. It has been leading the development of digital monitoring, reporting, and verification systems for climate mitigation projects. So finally, but most importantly, we need to talk about Singapore. So Singapore has all the elements to successfully lead evolution of the carbon markets, namely its long-term vision, strategy, and highly skilled financials investors, and efficient regulatory framework, and its infrastructure in all fronts. We are very fortunate to have a strong commitment and support from very strong support from the broad ecosystem of the Singapore. So in closing, let me note that this session is our opportunity to lay the roadwork for the future. So I'd like to wish very fruitful discussion for the participants. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Taku. That gives you a little flavor of the history of this and the depth of work that's gone on it. But I think it never would have come to pass if it hadn't been for having a really great technology partner. So now I want to bring up Lars Cavalli from Chia Network. Chia's been amazing in this, I think a blockchain company willing to do this on an open source basis, sort of recognizing the public good nature of this and helping to get us where we are today. So Lars, you get to come up and actually describe what the data trust is all about on the technology side. Thank you, Lars.
There you go. Lars Quayle is the name, that's right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you, everybody, and the partners for giving us a chance to speak. What I'm going to try and do is to make this a little bit more concrete for the folks that are in the audience. And I may not, or we may not, after the session today, be able to convince all of you, but I would posit that if we meet here in about a year's time, everyone in this room might actually have had use of the Climate Action Data Trust. Everyone in this room is a climate change practitioner. We're active, we're doing things. And then this comes from the fact of there's an ambition that Dirk referenced that we're trying to achieve. Tools like the Climate Action Data Trust are to try and help enable the kind of action that's required. The director and Tayuka mentioned the transparency that's needed in the marketplace. The minister mentioned some of the issues that often come up when there's a carbon market discussion, and whether it's around quality of offsets, transparency, trust, and so forth. And all of those are issues that the Climate Action Data Trust is actually trying to address. It's not just about creating a database of information, it's actually trying to help enable solutions to some of that. So to start from a base level, what it is a global metadata or an aggregation of data from the registries that contain the information on carbon projects. It is not replacing registries. It is essentially aggregating that data in a common data model. It's doing that through a peer-to-peer network structure, really a distributed ledger system, a blockchain, specifically the Chia blockchain. And that's really the idea that a registry can publish their own data. They are the authority of their own data, and they own their own data. But they publish it in this common interface that then creates a trail of information. So That's the core of what it is and what it does. And I think one thing that's important is to say that what does it mean when we say it launches today? What that means is that registry can publish their data today. Right? This is an open ecosystem. It's an open system, and that can start happening right now. We expect it'll take a little bit of time for registries to get used to how to publish their data and learn from that. I think as any practitioner in the market, if you see the use of this, then it might also be worth speaking to registries about the importance of speed of getting this data surfaced. So I did a couple of slides here just to kind of go through what it is it provides and what we're trying to do here. So if we think of some of those common themes in the carbon market, what is offset quality? Are offsets, there's a lot of questions about offsets. Are they real? Are they additional? Are they double counted, double issued, and all those things? One of the key ways of, if not solving that problem, but at least bringing more clarity to how big that problem is through transparency, right? And that is one of the key attributes of something like the Climate Data Trust. If you are a project developer, and several of the folks in this room are project developers, there are significant barriers to how to do that. I think most in here would probably agree that MRV and everything related to MRV being measurement, reporting, and verification is a very significant one. Finding enough expertise in the markets is a very significant issue for project development. Are there ways that you can help create solutions for that? The best way of enabling something like that is by creating an open ecosystem where companies that try to provide solutions, whether that's within MRV, whether that's within reference data for specific types of project, satellite monitoring and so forth, is if you can create an open ecosystem that those types of solution providers can tie into for data reference, for analytics and so forth, you might actually start seeing an explosion, not just of carbon projects, but actually of solutions being provided to carbon project developers. That's a key attribute of something like the Climate Action Data Trust. Financing projects, it's not necessarily difficult to do, and we have experts in this room that have done it for decades. It's just very expensive, and for certain types of projects, it's very, very expensive, or even not possible, specifically if they're on the smaller side. So other ways that surfacing some of this data, providing more tools to do risk analysis, to do more references of what have been the successful approaches, successful methodologies, which regions and so forth. Are there some ways that surfacing this data can enable more of that analysis to take place? Again, that's another attribute of something like the Climate Action Data Trust. And finally, in 2015, a decision was made that we're all familiar with, the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement is all about a peer-to-peer structure of how climate will happen going forward, and national determined contributions being an example of that. So you need to enable this kind of platform. Can you enable it in a way that respects the fact that the climate change community consists of 196 countries, as well as multiple different registries and other non-state actors that all interact in this market? And so how can they connect together? How can you enable that without having to set up an administration of some body that governs that whole thing? That's what the Climate Action Data Trust is trying to do as well. So if we think of those things, you know, the key items that we put on here was around transparency, open ecosystem, and data access, and a peer-to-peer network. And we can go to the next slide at this point. That may also be why you want to use a blockchain. In fact, I would posit that there's not necessarily a lot of other ways you can solve for this without using something like a blockchain or distributed ledger technology. The other attributes that come from that is making that public, accessible, as Dirk mentioned, open source, but also an immutable, auditable record. I would expect that a decent amount of the folks in this room have spent time downloading spreadsheets from a variety of different registries, trying to merge them together, trying to do analytics on those, and maybe even pulling their hair out or getting frustrated about how much time they actually had to do that just to prepare a slide for a conference somewhere. And so, yes, that will be done, that will be easier here, but you can even pull out the data and pull it into your own database and do analytics on that. You can set up your own database, essentially, of all the carbon data that's surfaced through the Climate Action Data Trust. This is really a tool to use, right? The Climate Action Data Trust is we're not trying to say that it's solving all those problems that we've spoken about. It's a tool you can use to potentially help solve some of those problems and actually build a business off. And that will help the carbon market move forward. When you talk about blockchains and you talk about carbon, there are a couple of things that come up. One is about tokenization. This is not tokenization. This is about using blockchain technology and for good. The other thing that comes up is about what are the criteria you might want to look at when you're thinking about a blockchain. And if you wanted to go to the next slide. Do we go to the next slide? There we go. So what is a blockchain? Is essentially a database, right? It's a database that creates this block of records, which means when a registry publishes their data to the Climate Action Data Trust, that is surfaced. Anyone can download that data, or folks can even host that data in their own part of the blockchain network if they choose to do so. If that data is then subsequently changed, then you can go back and see what was changed, right? That is as an example of functionality you can't do today unless you're the one running whichever registry you may be looking at. So it creates that immutable record. When you're thinking about using a blockchain, certainly in a climate market and environmental market, I would argue in any kind of market, there are some key criteria you want to think about. And we know one of the big ones has been about sustainability. It's also about having a secure infrastructure, making it accessible and public, and maybe most importantly, actually making it useful. There are several blockchains out of that. Chia is one of those. I believe that's why we were chosen, but there are other blockchains. But the key principles here is that this is what you need to require for using a technology like this. So I said I was going to try and make it a little bit more concrete. Hopefully I've done that. We have a couple of screenshots that we can go through to show you a little bit of how this works. So that if you want to flip to the next slide. Right, this is a project record. There's nothing unique here. There's nothing revolutionary here. Anybody that has logged into a registry before has seen something like this. What we're looking at here is test data. Right, we did this before today. But what is unique is that you now have this public free resource where you can surface this data and look at this data, filter this data across the multiple registries that will participate in the Climate Action Data Trust. If we go to the next slide, you can do the same kind of filtering and analytics on the units, so the carbon credits that have been issued. You will see the little download icon. So as I mentioned before, you can download all the information. You'll have it readily accessible to you. Again, you can even take the whole database structure and pull that out as well and set up your own database. And finally, we'll show the audit record on the next slide. So here's how the auditable record shows. Again, all of this is public data. All of this, this is how you can access and interact with this data. And the type of data that you can see. So just a little bit more on how this architecture has been set up, and then I'll sit down. So if we go to the next slide, one of the key pieces of work that came out of this, and I think Dirk may not have emphasized it enough, is that there is a technology infrastructure that's being set up here. There's also a organizational structure being set up. The actual secretariat that's being set up. And I think that will be incredibly helpful in terms of having somewhat of a convening body among the different registries. There are reasons why registries are different. There are very legitimate reasons for that. But the work of trying to create some commonality, some structure around some of that, to allow for easier potential transfers, or at least data harmonization between them, is very important. The first piece of work here is the data model. So this is the common data model that is in the Climate Action Data Trust. It's a public document. You don't need to take pictures and see it. I know it's very small, but I just want to kind of show these are all the fields that are tracked. Gemma and the team at the World Bank deserves a lot of credit for actually pushing this through and making this happen. But that is what powers the Climate Action Data Trust and the type of data that's in there. And then finally, on the next slide, that is then the data that's submitted by registries, that is hosted by registries, and then gets secured by the blockchain, right? So every time a registry will update their record of data, their full table will create a hash on a block, and that will show you that is the data. If then later that data is updated, there's a new hash, and you get the whole history through that. There's a lot of technology behind that. We have folks in the crowd, one of my colleagues, who can help explain that. We're not going to go into that right now, but it is made in a user-friendly way, so from a UI perspective, user interface perspective, you can access all of this data. So finally, what are some of the important things to take away from the conversation today? I think it is, think about how you can use it, right? Whether you are a problem solver, somebody who is trying to help think about how we can solve MRV, whether it's a ratings agency that's trying to help rate carbon credits. You can set up a service that basically integrates via an API to something like the Climate Action Data Trust, ingest all that data, and then layers analytics on top of that data. Layers other data. You can add pricing data to it and so forth. And that's the whole point of creating an open ecosystem and this common framework that can be referenced by that open ecosystem. So the last thing is just, this is about enabling action, right? It's about openness. And I think you'll see from the wide variety of folks that are involved in the Secretariat as well, that there's a wide representation of the market interest as well as perspectives that are being brought to create something like this. So with that, I'll end it right there.
Hello? Oh, I woke you up, didn't I? No, I was going to say I'm going to shift to sitting down mode. Sorry to those of you behind the podium, but I want to move into a little bit of a discussion about sort of what's brought us here, and then I'm going to unveil the members of the CAD Trust Council. That is sort of the next, is a big part of the announcement today, is really about the governance structure on taking this forward. But maybe before we get there, I want to probe a little bit about sort of the importance of this initiative with our colleagues in amongst the founding partners here, because the government of Singapore, World Bank, and IETA have pulled this together with this great technical support from Chia Networks. But a lot of thinking has gone into this. It's kind of grown out of a broader work program at the World Bank known as the Climate Warehouse. And for a long time, we called the data trust the Climate Warehouse, but actually the Climate Warehouse is much bigger than the data trust. It has a lot of other elements, and this is sort of one very concrete public benefit spin-off of it. But Hania Dawood, thank you for being with us. Hania is leading the World Bank team that is responsible for Climate Warehouse and maybe, I almost think more importantly, the work that you do with so many of your client countries and getting them ready to use Article 6. So maybe give us a little flavor of where this fits into the broader firmament of activities in the warehouse team at the World Bank.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dirk. So maybe first taking one step back, the Climate Warehouse is one of many things that we're doing in the World Bank around climate action. So the World Bank is the largest funder of climate action in emerging markets. Just last year, we invested about $32 billion in emerging markets across the World Bank, IFC, and MIGA. The Climate Warehouse is really the innovation pillar of our work at the World Bank. And it encompasses a variety of things, and we really like to think of it as our end-to-end digital ecosystem program. for building up and helping scale carbon markets. So we work with countries and governments that are starting to think about establishing registries, national registries, so that they can engage in Article 6 carbon credit transactions. We're starting to pilot digital MRV systems to capture emissions calculations and quantifications in an efficient and low-cost way. We're starting to think about tokenization to create digital assets that can be tradable on exchanges. The CAD Trust is really the metadata layer component of our work that aims to connect registries from independent standards, and as national registries start coming online, those as well, in a platform and data portal that really provides harmonization and transparency and traceability that helps with some of the challenges that Lars and Takuya mentioned around integrity of carbon markets. So it's one component of a broader end-to-end digital ecosystem program that we have at the bank around carbon markets.
Great, and maybe building out just a little further then, many of us that have worked in carbon markets over the years have benefited from some of the leverage that the World Bank has brought to mobilizing capital. And now we are in a new era under Article 6 where, well, it's not just Article 6, it's just the job has gotten so much more difficult as we're trying to achieve Paris-level ambition. So where does this fit into that broader financial role that you play?
So our work in carbon markets has been going on for a couple of decades. So we were very active in working with governments to build their capacity during the Kyoto era, and right now we're seeing a lot of increased interest and activity in the market. So a key part of our work with governments is a program called the Partnership for Market Implementation, where we're working with governments to build capacity. So to build capacity around how they should think about carbon pricing options, how they should think about carbon taxes. Some countries focus on specific sectors, some more broadly. Implementing emission ETS systems, operationalizing Article 6. So beyond the work on the infrastructure around carbon markets, there's a much broader program and work that we do with governments around capacity building, which is really important as carbon markets scale.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think I'm going to segue now to Benedict Chia. Not to be confused with the Chia Network, but Benedict, I think, is no stranger to folks in this room because of his leadership internationally, whether it be with the Article 6 developments or with the Corsia developments. You've really been a key player, but I'd love to get a little bit of flavor from you on, from a Singapore vantage point, what your vision is for the CAD Trust and why you've been so gracious in the offers to host it and to and really hosting is kind of the wrong word. It's the that Singapore has been willing to champion this really within a whole set of countries that have been working on this in the past couple of years. Tell us your vision.
Yeah, thanks so much, Doug. So before I answer your question, I think I should state that I have no financial interest at all in Chia Networks. And I thought that's a pretty important point to make, given that we are quite actively involved in this initiative itself. Yeah, so going back to your question in terms of what's our rationale for actually wanting to be an active part of this and what's our vision at the end of the day, I think it goes back to the importance that we see in terms of carbon markets itself. Singapore is a small, low-lying island, and for us, the impacts of climate change is existential, which is why we place great emphasis on the importance of achieving the Paris temperature goals itself. And for us to be able to achieve that, I think, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, collaborative approaches, cooperative approaches is absolutely critical. And that, I think, it's really the essence of Article 6. It's about cooperative approaches, bringing different countries, bringing different companies together. And one of the key elements or ingredients which is needed to facilitate these cooperative approaches from happening is transparency at the end of the day. If you look at where carbon markets have been, some of the criticisms that have been leveled at carbon markets, a lot of it actually can be addressed with greater transparency. The importance of addressing double counting is one of the major pieces that needs to be addressed going forward. In the past, if you look at the previous markets under the Kyoto Protocol, there wasn't really a critical need to do things like corresponding adjustments to address double claiming, double counting, because that was in a different regime where only developed countries take on binding goals, whereas in the developing countries were all taking on, in a sense, voluntary targets per se. But going forward, in order to achieve this much higher standard, all countries around the world actually need to play their part, which is why double counting comes into play. And if you want to effectively minimize the risk of double counting, you need this public good that the CAT Trust actually tries to bring into existence. So that's one of the key reasons why we actually hope, why we have actively leaned forward. The other couple of reasons, and I think which my minister mentioned in the opening remarks, which I think it's worth reiterating again, is what can Singapore contribute to this CAT Trust initiative? And I think we see ourselves contributing in two very broad areas itself. One is we have a very vibrant carbon market ecosystem here based in Singapore. And if you look at this public good that we are intending to build out, I think we see a lot of synergies in terms of how some of our players in our local ecosystem could potentially contribute to this effort itself. The other thing that we are hoping to do is that we are also actively reaching out to look for mutually beneficial collaborations on Article 6 with various countries around the world. We are in the process of talking to, in various stages of discussions with 20, 30 different countries. And for all these players, all these various countries and parties that we are talking to, I think one of the things that we would actively encourage them is to look at CAT Trust and the metadata layer that is being developed as a important tool to be plugged into. So we are trying to crowd in different players itself. The other reason I think why we hope to be able to play an important part in actually enabling some of these solutions is that ultimately what you want is to identify needle-moving and important decarbonization projects, initiatives, structure it through crediting type project, channel financing, channel technical expertise, undertake some of the capacity building so that you can prove the concept and you can scale it up and you can generate the abatement which is needed for us to advance climate action itself. And here, this is where we hope to play an important role, given that we are a key financial hub in Singapore. We are also a key technology center. There are a number of research institutes that we are housing in Singapore that are developing solutions that could potentially be exported and should be scaled around the world itself. So ultimately, what we hope to achieve, our vision for CAT Trust is for it to play a critical role in getting markets to scale up globally, getting people to accept that markets is actually a very important part, a very important medium and means for different countries, companies around the world to come and work together to be able to address and advance climate change, and for us to eventually, hopefully, meet the Paris temperature goals. Thanks.
Thank you. Hold on to the mic. I'm going to ask you just to amplify on one more element of this that I think you stressed well, you gave us that vision of sort of the potential here and some of the ways that Singapore is willing to offer support. One of the really interesting things about the structure of Article 6 from the get-go has been the freedom that countries have to utilize the 6-4 mechanism, the new and improved project crediting mechanism at a UN level, or to lean into the private standards that have developed over the years for servicing voluntary markets, but also increasingly have been recognized in compliance programs. And we've seen that, I think, in a number of the World Bank's client countries, but also the CORSIA program that you've been interested in, or not interested, you've helped to lead. This has been one of the objectives of this, is to see if we could do something really innovative to bring together not just the governmental programs that will be developing registries and integrating in, but also leveraging that experience of the independent registries, the private voluntary registries. Can you give a little flavor about the vision there that you see of how that type of a structure can help us to accelerate the drive to greater ambition?
I think what the Paris Agreement Article 6 structure does through 6.2 as well as 6.4 is to open up more channels and more avenues for different stakeholders to come on board, for them to actually play an active role. If I compare that to take for example the Kyoto Protocol mechanism. Under the Kyoto Protocol mechanism, if you are thinking of generating credits for compliance purposes, it's really the centralized mechanisms under KP itself, CDM, JI, and whatnot. There was no space for some of these voluntary programs, international offset programs, to come in and to play a role itself. But Article 6 actually changes that. There is 6.4 mechanism, which is essentially the successor to the CDM, but there's 6.2, I think, as you rightly pointed out, which opens the door for multiple players to come on board itself, for companies to play a role, for different countries, for different programs to actually come in to play a role. And I think that's absolutely critical. And it's absolutely critical because if you look at the challenge ahead of us, it's really quite mammoth. And I don't think you can rely on only a smaller subset of players to actually effectively address the challenge that is facing humanity, that's facing us. It's really an all-hands-on-deck approach. And for us, our vision is that we feel that 6.2, 6.4, 6.8 are all equally important in the overall approach towards countries, companies coming together to collaborate itself. And our hope is to see vibrant activities happening across all the various fronts. Everybody being able to see that they have a part to play. There's scope for more innovations in terms of how we can identify new areas which we have never thought about, which could potentially play a part in decarbonization itself. Pilot it, test bid it, if it works, to actually scale it up for it to be more widely adopted itself. And for all these multitude and diversity of players to be able to play an effective role while still ensuring that the market functions properly, I think is where CAT Trust comes into the picture. It's a metadata layer that, in a sense, connects all the various players together, all the different registries that come on board, either a mechanism registry or a country registry, and it allows you to look at the whole life cycle of a carbon credit, from the time it's being created, originated, all the way when it's used, traded, and eventually when it's being retired. And this transparency, this glue that brings together all the various players, we think is very critical for this market, which is a lot more diverse, to be able to work in an effective manner. And that's the vision that we actually hope to achieve. And I think on this, I really want to thank IETA, I want to thank World Bank for having the courage to put forth this vision. I mean, when we first spoke to IETA and World Bank on this, it was in just before the start of the pandemic itself, early 2020, late 2019. And for those of you who remember, that was the time where we tried to get Article 6 at Katowice, Madrid, not successful. And at that point in time, if you talk to various market participants, a lot of them will give you a fairly gloomy picture as to whether we would eventually get Article 6 or not. But even in the midst of this uncertainty, both IETA and World Bank had the courage to actually be visionary and say that this is important, this is absolutely critical. And it is worthwhile us putting together, partnering together to advance this effort itself. And I think it was heartening that we eventually got Article 6. And for us, when Dirk came to me to talk about this, and when the World Bank first came to us, we think this feels like a no regrets thing. with or without Article 6, this is something that's absolutely critical. This is something that we should absolutely do. So I'm quite heartened that after 3 years of working and talking together, actually the time span is more, because I understand that World Bank and IETA started the conversation even much earlier for this CAT trust to eventually come to fruition. But there's still work to be done. We want to show that it can be operationalized. We want to show that we can eventually bring few more players on board and to demonstrate that actually it has a critical role to play. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. Hanya, I'm going to come back to you just for building on one element that Ben touched on there at the end, and that is the bringing of more countries on board. Where would you like to see this evolve with your client countries in the next 6 months to 12 months?
Yeah, thanks, Dirk. So what does success look like for the bank in a year? We'd love to see as many registries, the independent standards, onboarded within the next couple of months. And we're really committed to work with 15 developing countries to get them started with their national registries. They have the option to choose. We have two offerings, a core registry and an enhanced registry, which will be connected to the CAT trust. So our goal is really to get a critical mass, because CAT trust is a global public good, but a global public good with 3 players isn't really going to achieve the externalities and the network effects that we're looking for. But a CAT trust that has the voluntary standards, that 4 standards have about 80 to 90% of the activity. If we get that, if we get the countries that are setting up registries to partake in Paris alignment, so the more parties start signing up to the CAT, the much more useful this product can be to add this layer of transparency and integrity that we've been talking about.
Thanks. I'm going to move to Gemma Torres next, because if you really want to know where the brains in the operation is, it's been Gemma Torres over the last couple of years in really shepherding this along. Give us your sense, Gemma, then, of as we build this out, what is happening next in the ecosystem, the digital ecosystem that you and the others in the warehouse team are working on?
Sure, thank you so much. So as Hania mentioned, we are conceptualizing an end-to-end digital ecosystem under the Climate Warehouse program, also following the guidance of Chandra Sinha, also here in the audience. Basically, we're now focusing on starting on the digital MRV systems to improve the collection of data using sensors, satellite data. Then we're moving also to developing national carbon registries, on-chain, off-chain, then as well tokenization instruments, and the metadata layer is the one that we just launched together with the partners today. So we're having a lot of exciting products that are being developed and conceptualized and piloted in the next year. And hopefully we will be keeping modeling this private-public partnership that we're also displaying here today, and bringing the ecosystem, these public goods.
So for, again, to your client countries at the World Bank, for those that may want to connect to this, how do they do that?
So there are essentially 3 different ways that you'll connect to something like Climate Action Data Trust. And again, all of this is public. There's no secrets here. It's data that's on or it's information that's on the Climate Action Data Trust website, and certainly happy to help guide you through the materials as well. There's for most registries, certainly the registries that have a decent amount of data, the way you connect is through our API. Right, standard APIs that are used all across all types of markets, financial and otherwise, and that's certainly for a lot of data, that's the way you would integrate. There are potential ways where it can be done through upload of Excel spreadsheets or similar, as well as for maybe much more emerging programs where you have maybe a couple of projects, not a lot of updates, a user interface that can be used. So really, it's an idea of trying to make it as flexible and accessible a way of contributing to the Climate Action Data Trust. And
thanks for that, Lars. And I am going to come back to Gemma, though, on maybe just giving this audience a little flavor of the journey in getting here and some of the challenges that we face and those that have been overcome in getting us to this point, and maybe a little bit about what's next in sort of the innovation space around this.
Yeah, so as we have mentioned, we have been prototyping and testing the platform for the last 3 years. And since the beginning, we have heard from the stakeholders there's a pressing need to access sophisticated, high-quality registry data that is real-time. It's not there. We have right now decentralized registries, different formats, different governance rules, different technological systems. And so in this context, the bottom-up nature of the Paris Agreement gave us more flexibility and choice to achieve the climate goals, but at the same time is increasing the complexity and the diversity of reporting and verification mechanisms. And so in this context, data and trade infrastructure are a precondition to provide a more transparent and inclusive market. And here's where during the testing phase, we gathered a lot of feedback from these participants, and the main challenges were we have these legacy systems, how we can adjust, update these systems so we can able to integrate to the Climate Action Data Trust. And some countries may have issues in capacity, some other countries may have some legal security arrangements that they need to make, but that's why the testing was really useful. So we could note all these challenges and identify the solutions to be able to implement the Climate Action Data Trust. In terms of the next steps, as mentioned, we are now working on a registry offering, providing a registry that will be leveraging distributed ledger technology. So you can also tokenize carbon credits, and then it will be synced and integrated to the Climate Action Data Trust. Or if you want to have an off-chain registry, you can also use the enhanced registry that we're building that is off-chain and has an MRV system embedded. So this registry offering will be able to be customized based on the requirements of our country client partners.
Excellent. Well, I think it's time to unveil the governance now. So I want to thank the four of you for your remarks, but I want you to stay with me on stage as I welcome up some new people. But maybe as a segue on this, part of our work with the warehouse team and the government of Singapore over the last year was to really come up with a concrete model for how to have a public-private partnership in leading the data trust going forward. So this is something that there aren't very many examples of this, and certainly not in the carbon market space, where both the private sector and the government sectors are a part of a leadership group that oversee and shepherd something along. So we have, with a lot of help from Peter Zaman and the team at HFW, our lawyers here in Singapore, we've structured a new institution that was founded about 2 weeks ago. And yesterday we had the first meeting of the CAD Trust Council. And if we can put the slide on the screen, I'd love to introduce to you to some of the members who were able to be here in person. Others appeared virtually. But the CAD Trust Data Council, up here on the screen, is Juan Pedro Cerro, who is a dear friend of many of us from his hard work on carbon markets over the years from the government of Chile. Sonam Tash, who has also been emerging as a leader from Bhutan. I think is highly respected in the Article 6 negotiations. Mbaye Diagne from Senegal, again, a leader of the African group of negotiators, a dear friend and wise counsel to many of us in carbon markets as they relate to developments in Africa. Chris Shipley from the UK, and Chris, come on up on stage. Chris Shipley has agreed on behalf of the UK government to join this, this leadership group. Ruyan Gan from Singapore. Ruyan's here somewhere. Ruyan, please come on up on stage. Kentaro I'm missing your last name, Kentaro. Takahashi from Japan. Kentaro, come on up. And then from the private standards, Andrew Howard from Vera. Come on up, Andrew. And we also have Hugh Solway from the Gold Standard Foundation, who is not able to be with us in person. Kishore Rahaja from the GCC, and in his behalf, come on up, Amit. We also have representation from the GCC on the council. And then finally, Lauren Woods from the American Carbon Registry. She also could not be here with us today, but was rounding this out. So this gives you some flavor for the governing council now that's going to be helping to guide this. IETA has been appointed by this council, shockingly, as the secretariat to help, at least on an interim basis, for standing up and supporting this new initiative. And again, I think this is really a remarkable achievement in terms of having a flavor of both public and private entities that are going to be working together on this public good that really, we hope, will harness the strengths of both the compliance and voluntary markets. I want to give each of you a chance just to say a word about what interested your organizations in sort of becoming a part of this, although it's maybe stating the obvious a little bit. But Andrew, if you don't mind starting us off, and then we'll just work our way down, just to say a quick word, and then I want to open it to the audience for questions and comments. But Andrew, please.
Yeah, thanks, Dirk, and also Ben and Hania. It's good to be here. It's good to be part of this initiative. I think as Vera, we do make up around 3/4 or so of the certification of the market supply. So there's already a lot you can do with Vera and our BCS program, but we are really happy to be part of a bigger initiative. It's about scaling the entire BCM, and that's really good to be part of. And we look forward to the kind of dialogue that we're going to have within the data trust. I think that's really good. I think we've already heard a lot about the advantages of it. I mean, certainly from the user's perspective and the stakeholder, project developers, proponents' perspective, there's a lot that you can make out of the data, which is going to be a joined up market view. I think there's a lot of value in that. I think speaking from our perspective as a standard, we also see that the common approach. Both in terms of working with a data model from our registry towards the data trust, but also the forum for discussion that we're going to have in the council, and also the other forums and committees. That's a really good opportunity to be able to work together and actually to sort of dialogue with our peers, which is something that we haven't really done that much of before. So I think that's a really good new development. And I think the last thing I'd say is I think we see it as a platform going forwards, which you can really build upon. And Gemma, we've already heard ideas of what the bank is doing in that area to build upon it. There's a lot that can be done, and priorities that we also have at Vera is things like digitalization of the MRV. I mean, that's going to be so crucially important to the scaling as we go forward. Interoperability of registries is something that we're also really curious and interested in. And in that vein, it's really good to be able to see the registries of the independent standards alongside country registries as we move forwards. We talk a lot about convergence of the voluntary market and the compliance markets. We're not always very clear about what we mean by that convergence, but I think the ability to move units from one place to another is going to be really crucial going forward. So we do see that as really important, and the independent standards like BERA, we're already working together with some countries, and it's been our VCUs are accepted into some compliance markets, and we do see that that's something that can really be built on going forward. So yeah, we really look forward to working with everybody through this initiative.
Great. And if you don't mind just passing the mic down, Amit, please say hello and what GCC's interest is.
No, I think, thank you very much, Dirk. And I think over the period, for some time, the verifiers have been requesting us and asking us, how do we verify the corresponding adjustment? How do we verify whether or not the penetration of the projects, which is a common practice requirement in the additionality? I think this was very important. How do we identify double registration issuance? I think the answer to this is with the 40 parameters that have been taken out of this climate warehouse is an answer for this. I think it was very important for us to get into this board, and also being the only program from the Global South, I think it's also important to have that voice also from the stakeholders in the Global South to bring into this whole ecosystem. So that was our motive, and congratulations to all the World Bank team. I think we have been working with them for 2 years, also with the government of Singapore, and to, of course, to IETA, and thank you very much for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Rian.
Hi, yeah, thank you. So I think I will be repeating a lot of what Benedict would have said, but I will keep it short. So I think Singapore's interest is really about operationalizing Article 6 and translating whatever decided at COP into practice, even though it's learning by doing. So I think Singapore's interest is really about implementation of Article 6 cooperation. And CAT Trust is definitely one of the key pieces of work that will actually enable interoperability, like what Andrew had said earlier on. So that's really our interest in that. Yeah, I will pass it on to Kantar.
And part of your personal interest was ending the weekly call with Dirk for how many months or years? I can't remember, but no. We'll continue that, I'm sure. Kintaro.
Thank you very much. And actually, Japan have a very much interest on the capacity building, as many one already mentioned, because government of Japan has established the Article 6 implementation partnership on November 16 during the COP27. And thank you very much, World Bank, Singapore government, and IETA to support for our partnership. And next year, our target for the capacity building is institutional arrangement, as well as the registry and also reporting, because those infrastructure is very much important for implementation of the Article 6. And so we have a very much collaborate. We are very happy to collaborate with IETA and also Singapore government, World Bank, to seek more opportunity. And I think so currently maybe at the beginning stage, our focus on the government sector, but in the future, I think the private sector should also have a more understanding how to watch the registry system, because the currently the more information disclosure will be important role for the transparency. So we are happy very to collaborate with the government as well as the industry sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kintaro, and also thank you for reminding us about the capacity building effort that Japan has launched, and I think this is something many of us in this room will be getting involved in, I think, in helping, again, to breathe life into the Article 6 tools that are available, and that capacity building will be hugely important. So thank you for that. And I want to thank Chris Shipley for the Glasgow Climate Agreement. But also just
all my own work, you know.
But Chris, also give your view on UK's interest here.
Sure. Yeah. For us, it's simply about making sure that markets achieve their potential. And so, as you say, you know, we took a big step towards that at COP26 in Glasgow with the agreement of the Glasgow Climate Pact and agreement of Article 6 rules. And that's a key achievement of our presidency, and it's also you know, a credit and a testament to the effort that all the parties put in to that, and all the non-state actors as well who are active from the sidelines. So for us, yeah, it's about making sure that markets can realise their potential, and we spend a significant part of our ODA budget looking to develop those capacities in developing countries. So we're a big contributor to PMI, as Hania mentioned, and we're excited about the role that could play in underpinning the CAD Trust too. As the UK, we're not actually looking to use credits towards our domestic targets, but we're more in the market space to strengthen them as a public good. And so there's a high alignment there with what's trying to be, with the main, you know, with the setup of the CAD Trust here, which is really to open markets up as much as possible, to shed light on them, to improve the choice that's available to stakeholders, to country sellers. Yeah, and I think that really the transparency thing is important, because the more we share, the faster we learn, the quicker markets can realise their potential. So yeah, we're very happy to be involved and looking forward to the next step.
Great, thank you. Well, we have a few minutes now available for Q&A, and would love to open it up to the floor if there's anyone that has a question of clarification or a comment on this. We're going to open it up, and I will say there are drinks waiting in a few minutes, but we do have just a few minutes prior to that to open it up. But of course, the lights are kind of bright, so I can't see all that well. Anyone got a question or a comment? I should have never said that thing about the drinks. Please, yes. But I need help with a microphone. Here it comes. And if you don't mind, introduce yourself and ask your question. And somebody up here should know the answer to it.
Sure, thanks. Vivian Liu of Philanthropy Works. I advise sovereign wealth funds in certain entities on climate alpha and risk and so on. Entities like GIC, actually. So to the council, first of all, congrats, and I look forward to your leadership. What do you regard as the greatest challenge to advancing, your goals for moving or accelerating us towards net zero as quickly as possible, say in the next 3 to 5 years? Thanks.
Greatest challenge. I'm going to go to Benedict first, but I want to, in the spirit of public-private, I want to go to Andrew next.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So I would say the greatest challenge is in translating what the CAT Trust actually tries to achieve. So transparency is one thing, but transparency on its own isn't going to achieve anything. It's what people do with transparency. And one of the key things, at least to me, that would be a key challenge is to scale up decarbonization solutions. We hope that through the offerings of the CAT Trust, laying out the public good, identifying how credits are generated, how credits are being used, actually opens up the market and creates greater confidence in the market. But confidence needs to be translated to people being able to identify where some of the most promising solutions are, being willing to come together, work together, invest either in terms of the finances, technical expertise, capacity building to actually scaling that up itself. And I think that's the biggest challenge. So I'd say CAT Trust, it's an important element, but it's not the only element. And for us to be able to achieve some of our Paris goals and outcomes that we want to work towards, actually we need to push on multiple fronts. And to me, my own view, that's the key challenge out there. Thanks.
Andrew, anything to add?
Sure, I'd certainly echo the need to work on multiple fronts there. Obviously when you work in the space of accrediting projects, then there's some people very happy with what you do, and there's others who are really not very happy at all. I think we're all aware of the challenges in the use of credits as we go forward. But I think in the context of how the private sector can really make a strong move towards net zero, we really need to clarify what the role of crediting is within the decarbonization that Ben's talking about. And I think that the CAD Trust perhaps plays a role in getting that kind of transparency out there as to what the credits are, which can contribute also alongside other initiatives which are trying to clarify how you can use credits legitimately in your work towards net zero. And I think obviously of initiatives like the VCMI, which are trying to clarify a legitimate space for the use of credits. So indeed, CAD Trust is not alone in working on that greater goal, but I think it does play part of the role towards getting the transparency, towards being able to make clear how credits are able to be used in this fight towards net zero.
Great, thanks, Andrew. I see another hand in the back. Is anybody else going to raise a hand, by the way? Okay, no worries.
Oh, hi everyone, thanks so much for the awesome presentation. So I'm Terence, I'm an intern at the platforms team with Climate Impact X. So actually I wanted to ask, because there is an increasing growth of retail customers, individuals who purchase carbon credits and retire them, I think one of the big challenges for the small scale but high volume transactions is that traditional retirement on traditional registry is quite time consuming. Like you only can retire maybe 10 tons, 1,000 tons. But if we want to enable more consumers to make an impact to the environment, I was wondering whether is there any plans for the CAD Trust to allow like exchanges or marketplaces to upload their individual small scale retirements onto the CAD Trust. Thank you.
Great. Gemma, I'm probably going to come to you on this because I think just about the service layer that we've been contemplating around this. Is that all right? Give a little flavor, and then Lars, if you want to comment on it as well.
Yeah, thank you. I will probably pass it to Lars as well. So the Climate Action Data Trust, one of the phased approach is that first we're going to have the registries being connected, and once the data is aggregated and harmonized, we expect to unlock private sector innovation so corporates can tap into this data and provide forecasting, analytics, and due diligence and ratings, so other services that will allow the carbon markets to keep scaling up. And so, and linked to your question, as I mentioned before, we're also now developing a public good on-chain registry, which would provide a more seamless and faster and more efficient way to create digital representations of the carbon credits and allow transactions across different stakeholders in the ecosystem. And on that, maybe I can pass it to Lars.
Sure. Thanks for your question. It's a very good question, right? Because there clearly has been an issue there of the transparency to the end buyer, especially when we're talking about an individual or a retail or smaller buyer. And I think the first thing is on the Climate Action Data Trust, it really is a representation of the data that's in the registry, right? The registries that are here, and some are represented here, they're the authority, right? And so I know some of them are looking into how to solve for that gap as well. And to the extent they do that, then absolutely that can be in the Climate Action Data Trust. So that's kind of one perspective on this. A second one is that certainly there are solutions that can be built that essentially ingest the data from the Climate Action Data Trust and potentially use that to provide more transparency for specific projects or specific standards or in countries and so forth. And then the third element is that something like blockchain and potentially something like tokenization or on-chain registries, as the World Bank has mentioned, are other ways you potentially can help solve for that last gap in the marketplace.
Thank you, Lars. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Good. Well, I think we make, oh, there's another one? Ah. Please, yes. Back in the back. Not all the way in the back, but back far enough.
Hi,
oh, Rob.
thanks very much. Hi, Dirk. I have a question about the transparency side of things. It sounds like the information is going to be replicating what's on the registries. Does that include project documentation? Or is this just the credit registries rather than the project databases? And is that part of your journey, is to go further into the actual transparency of each project as well?
Gemma, do you want to talk a bit about the data model? And
So thank you for the question. So the two components that the Climate Action Data Trust is based on, one is the data layer, right? So it's a common data model, a taxonomy that has around 40 data fields on project and unit-related data. These data fields have been validated for the last 3 years with key stakeholders in the market, more than the 80%, with the key independent standards and national governments. And this data model will be crucial because once the registries are connected to the platform through an API or manually, they will be filling in these data requirements, and every registry will be filling in the same information according to this data model. And just a quick clarification, it's not replicating or duplicating the data, it's basically a reflection of the data. So the source of truth is the registry, and in the platform we see the data reflected in there in a harmonized common form following the taxonomy that has been validated. And then the second component is the blockchain layer, which is basically taking this data and securing it on-chain, so we're able to trace back any changes made by the registry. So if registry A made any change 3 months ago on a specific unit data, I can go back as registry B and check what was the change, and we cannot remove this change, and that's the part of the blockchain, the value proposition, that we are recording and tracking data on-chain that cannot be edited or removed by a top-down authority, but it's the peer-to-peer validation network and process. So going back to your question, it's the data model that the registries will be filling into this data, and it's a reflection of this data. I don't know, Lars, if you want to add anything.
Well, I think from a technical standpoint, the easy answer is it can certainly hold more data. That's not the problem, right? There's a question of how much more, because again, you want to have a data model that works for most of the participants, meaning the registries. I think what type of data that may be added in the future, that's a question for the folks next to me, right? That's what the council's role is. The user committee, the technical committee is to figure out what is important to the marketplace, and then maybe we should add that.
Great, thank you. So I think what I want to do here in drawing this to a close, I'm going to go back to Hania and Ben for a closing reflection. But I also want to advertise what Lars just referenced, that one of the actions that the council took yesterday was to establish a technical committee, at least the start of a technical committee, that will be where a lot of the action is on taking the data model that we have and refining and improving it and curating it over time. That group of names will be listed on the website coming up soon. And in addition, a user forum. And the user forum, we will be launching a call for expressions of interest from people from the carbon markets community and from academia and NGOs to consider being a part of the users forum that will provide advice, kind of feedback on a regular basis on as we build this out. So those couple of opportunities coming. So let me come, Hania, to you for a closing reflection, then Ben, and then I'll give one, and maybe by then the drinks will be ready. We'll see. Hania?
Thank you very much. So maybe I'll just go back to the first question because I think it's a really important one. So the GATT Trust is one piece of a much bigger puzzle, and really the puzzle is about achieving our climate ambition and our climate goals. And for that, we need policy, we need to mobilize finance, and we need to identify projects that we can finance. And carbon markets is really one piece that links into all of these, but specifically finance. And what we really hope to achieve, what we really hope the recent agreements in COP27 and COP26 around Article 6, what we really hope this will achieve is unlock finance from carbon markets, unlock finance from Article 6 markets, from the voluntary carbon markets. And I think ultimately for us at the World Bank, our goal is to help scale up the market in a way that benefits our client countries, developing countries that suffer the most from climate change but are least responsible for it. So if we can together work collaboratively to really help unleash the power of carbon markets and carbon credits to achieve our climate goals, then that's really would be our collective success.
Thank you, Hania. Ben?
I wanted to thank Dirk for mentioning the user community in his remarks, and I think I want to use my closing remarks to maybe shed a little bit, or rather to underline the importance of the user community. I mean, through our discussion, we haven't really talked too much about the user community, but I just wanted to say that I think that this is a critical piece. For the Climate Action Data Trust to actually be successful, we need a vibrant user community that embraces it, that is willing to continuously work with the technical committee and all the various governance components, contributing their views, helping us refine this effort as we go along. And I do suspect that as carbon markets are dynamic, as they evolve, we need to have our ears very close to the ground, be able to work with the key users out there, be able to be agile and nimble, and to be able to anticipate change, just as we were anticipating change when this initiative was actually launched itself. And I think for it to succeed, for it to go forward, we need to have that very close links with some of the key users that are expected to leverage on this public good, this product that is out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. And I guess my closing reflection is I think the real intent here, as you could kind of glean from all of these remarks, is about the scaling and the ambition and a recognition that markets have a phenomenal role that they can play in helping to deliver on the Paris ambition. But we do have a trust problem. We have had a trust problem, and you kind of hear it reflected a bit. And this transparency and trust that can be provided by the Climate Data Trust, the Climate Action Data Trust, could be fundamental in helping to restore some of the public confidence, because we all know that all of you in this room are change agents in the companies that you work. You're people who are trying to actually harvest emission reductions and bring them to market and scale up that investment. And our hope is that this joint endeavor will help to undergird that and help be a turning point for that restoration of trust and confidence, because we are about an incredible mission here that will achieve more effectively together than trying to work apart. So with that, I also want to, in closing, recognize my team at IETA that helped to bring this about. And I think somewhere in this room, Simon Henry is probably here. Yeva Stepanovic is here somewhere, and Alistair Ware, and even Brett Orlando, who had the horrible judgment to leave IETA for Bank of America, but you know that happens now and then. Also has played a pivotal role, as well as Luca Bernacchi. So I want to thank that team, because they're going to continue to help take this forward. And then if you have any hard questions, you should ask them and not me. And with that, we can close this session. Please join me in thanking all of these leaders on the stage. And I'm led to believe that there are drinks in the mezzanine, drinks and refreshments, kind of that way, right, Luca? And please join us out there for some informal conversation around this. Also, I want to pass along a tip. Last night, for those of you who are at the welcoming reception, I said that you could have a free tour of the art history, art science museum. But they ended up having to close early. But they said if you come by anytime in the next 3 days with your pass, they'll let you take a free tour. So just a tip sometime in the next couple of days. Thank you all.